Good afternoon, 8th grade. It is Tuesday, April 14th. We're in a new section, new chapter today. Time for freedom and responsibility. And this is going through the 1950s. We'll be learning about President Dwight D. Eisenhower, JFK's New Frontier, and several things that go on in the 1950s, 60s, 70s. So let's dive into section 21.1, Progress and Prosperity in the 1950s. The United States emerged from World War II as the most powerful and prosperous country in the world. After the war, many young couples bought houses and started families. As the birth rate soared, America experienced a baby boom. This rapid growth of families greatly increased the needs for goods and services. Living in a country that rewarded hard work with increased wages and profits, parents worked hard to provide for their children. Americans soon became the most productive workers in the world, and the economy thrived. By the 1950s, America had made a truly remarkable economic transition, with the promise of more progress to come. A strong moral and spiritual foundation undergirded America's prosperity. Americans still practiced the Protestant work ethic, taking pride in their work and striving for excellence. The moral values of biblical Christianity provided a just standard of law, order, and mutual respect, which in turn increased material prosperity. So today's section, Progress and Prosperity in the 1950s, Moral Strength, Respect for Christianity. During the 1950s, church attendance continued to play a prominent role in the life of the community. Though not everyone attended church, most people respected the biblical teachings of law, order, and moral decency. Local governments often required stores to close on Sundays, and community activities in many areas were planned not to interfere with church services. School days often began with prayer, and Bible reading and parent-teacher meetings in civic organizations usually opened with prayer. Evangelists conducted crusades throughout the nation. Young evangelist Billy Graham held large tent meetings in the Los Angeles area in the late 1940s. Several prominent entertainers attended his meetings and hit the sawdust trail. Graham received national news coverage which led to large televised crusades, making him one of the best known and respected persons in America and the world. American missionaries labored around the world, and many Americans supported missionaries through their local churches, through their giving. Foreign missions received national attention when, in 1956, 5 young American missionaries were killed by Aqua Indians in the jungles of Ecuador. The news media gave the story prominent coverage. Elizabeth Elliot, wife of martyr Jim Elliot, wrote a book about this missionary endeavor entitled Through Gates of Splendor. Most Americans admired the courage and determination of Christian missionaries. Strong families, little crime. Families were strong during the 1950s. Most couples considered divorce an absolute tragedy and made every effort to stay together and work through their difficulties. In small towns, people could leave their houses and cars unlocked. Children played without fear in local parks. In the larger cities, crimes were primarily heard of in the back alleys. People considered the occult, illegal drugs, pornography, homosexuality, and other immorality to be the most disgraceful sins, and gambling was illegal in most places. Also, the sanctity of life. Courts punished criminals, offenders. People knew that. If they broke the law, severe penalties would follow. Because people believed in the sanctity of human life, most states practiced capital punishment, the execution of those guilty of murder. Most people believed that God instituted capital punishment in Genesis 9, 5-6 to discourage murder and to teach mankind the value of human life. Abortion, the killing of babies before birth, was also illegal throughout the United States. So you can see that there's a lot of differences between the United States of the 1950s and the United States of today. Let's learn about its thriving economy. The war effort and increased world trade after World War II revived the American economy. American factories made a relatively smooth transition from military to civilian production. Ford Motor Company went from producing tanks back to producing automobiles. The threat of communism and the need to keep our armed forces built up kept defensive plants busy. New technologies developed during World War II made American industry the most efficient in the world. People worked hard, saved hard, and invested their money, providing the capital for economic growth. Thus, the productive years after World War II brought forth the research and later development of jet aircraft, computers, lasers, and medical wonders. Hardworking Americans had the resources to improve their lives, support their family, and invest in the future. And through all this, the housing boom happens. Between 1946 and 1956, the construction of new homes boomed. Congress had passed the Servicemen's Readjustment Act, or the GI Bill of Rights, which made low-interest government loans available to veterans for the purchases of homes, farms, and businesses, or for college tuition. Some 12 million men and women had served in the armed forces and qualified for these new benefits. As returning veterans married and started families, the demand for homes skyrocketed. And as a result of this, the idea of mass-produced homes comes to the forefront. Levin and Sons introduced mass production of low-cost housing in the 1940s with the development of Levittown, a community of 6,000 homes on the outskirts of New York's Long Island. Like Henry Ford, the Levitts increased production and cut costs by mass-producing homes in an assembly line fashion. At $8,000, Levitt's homes were easily affordable, and veterans could rent a home until they were ready to buy because the GI Bill made financing easy. Soon, other builders were using Levitt's mass production ideas to build suburban developments from Illinois all the way to California. The house-building boom was linked to the shift of population from the farm to the city. Nearly 1/3 of every American lived on the farm in 1930, but between 1940 and 1970, the number dropped from 1 in every 4 to fewer than every 1 in 20. Advances in crop production and the increased use of machinery allowed more people to leave the farm. Because these machines could produce more crops than workers could, it was okay that these people left the farm. Their hands, though without the production of machines would have been missed, these machines could produce and pick up crops a lot faster than people could. From the city to the suburb. By the late 1950s, most families owned a home and a car. Many families owned more than one car. For the first time in history, people had the mobility to go wherever they pleased, whenever they pleased, with a minimum of time and effort. After World War II, about 1 million city residents moved to the suburbs every year. By the 1960s, more people lived in the suburbs than in the cities. With the widespread ownership of automobiles and construction of new road systems, many people began to commute from their suburban home to an office or factory in the city. As the suburbs grew, they added industrial parks, recreational facilities, and shopping malls. Large cities with suburban areas became known as metropolitans. And as a result, people needed places to shop and buy, and supermarkets come out at this time too. Before the 1950s, fresh fruit and vegetables had only been available during their short local growing seasons. Foods such as oranges and bananas were considered luxuries in most places. Now though, better and faster transport brought fresh fruit, vegetables, meat, and dairy products to new local town supermarkets that you could find in your local city or your local town. New technology increased the production of food and led to better ways of preserving food, such as freezing. Better food, better markets, and also better health. Advances in medical technology contributed to better health. The polio vaccine developed by Dr. Jonas Salk in the 1950s ended the spread of polio, a disease that crippled parts of the body. Vaccines were also developed for measles, mumps, diphtheria, tetanus, whooping cough, and other diseases. So let's look at improvements in technology. New technologies in the workplace allowed many Americans to work fewer hours per week, and new technologies at home made chores less time-consuming. We had things such as your kitchen appliances, blender, microwave, wall-to-wall carpeting, drapings, painting, and tiles, mass production. So not only do you have new technologies like your electrical stove, but new paints, new drywalls. You could build a house much quicker now. And because of all this extra time, leisure and recreation come into the forefront. People such as Jackie Robinson, baseball becomes very popular at this time, and musical performances, starring the great Marian Anderson in Philadelphia. And tourism, of course. People wanted to tour the Great Smoky Mountains, Yellowstone, and historic Civil War battlefields. And people wanted to travel worldwide, too. So in 1958, the first propeller passenger jet, the Boeing 707, was introduced. Walt Disney comes to the forefront at this time and builds the first theme park, Disneyland, in Anaheim, California in 1955. And it becomes a model for later entertainment and theme parks we see today. And lastly, before I conclude this section, a great invention, well, some people consider it a great time waster today. In the 1950s, almost every American home added this new piece of furniture to their living room, the television. And it replaced radios, newspapers, and magazines as the major source of information gathering because the news moved to the television. Of course, they started out as these really small, and I mean tiny screens, early black and white models, but color sets, they become widespread in the 1960s. So early TVs, black and white, small image, but still, in the 1950s, almost every American family had one. Well, that concludes today's section. I'm not going to have you do any section review today, because you took that test yesterday. I know you might be a little worn out from that, or if you haven't finished it, make sure you finish it. And with that, I'll see you guys Wednesday.